Hello, everybody, and welcome to this third webinar in our series, The New World. Welcome to those that have followed the last two webinars, and welcome also to the newcomers. We are going to dive a little bit into the practical details of this webinar. We have talked about Commission strategies, and we have talked about institutional practices, and how we deal with the transatlantic relationship. But now we need to talk about one of the premises of this webinar series, that the world has changed. It has gotten more risky. And we have with us two speakers who will tell us about how to handle that as institutions. So I think some of the main questions are, what do we need to know? How much do we need to be aware of risk, and what capacity do we need to deal with risk? And what do we need to do once we know the risk? And I think as a starting point for everybody, we do this not to stop cooperation, but we do this to be able to have cooperation with everybody in a safe way. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Not much for me to do than to hand over to our speakers. We'll start with Slaven Misljencevic from the European Commission, who is very much engaged in the Commission guidelines on foreign interference, which I think many of our members are looking very much forward to. After that, we'll have Albin Gaunt from Karolinska Institutet in Sweden, well known for their Nobel Prizes, who will talk about how that looks from a national perspective and how the discussions in Sweden work. But first of all, Slaven, please go ahead. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you for having me here. I hope everybody can see the slide I'm presenting right now. So just to start, so when we talk about risks associated to international cooperation, then there is one risk that has increased as a result of changes in the geopolitical landscape and increased connectivity. I'm referring to a risk of foreign interference. And over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I will try to answer three basic questions. First of all, what is foreign interference? Why should higher education institutions be concerned about this, and why are they a potential target? And finally, how can higher education institutions protect themselves against foreign interference? So let's start with what is foreign interference. Well, first of all, there is no universal definition of what foreign interference is. And therefore, when we started working on this issue, and in order to frame the discussions, we need to clearly define what we understand under foreign interference. So we at the European Commission see foreign interference as activities that are carried out by or on behalf of a foreign actor, which are coercive, meaning making somebody do something that they do not want to do, using force or threatening to use force, covert, not openly acknowledged or displayed, deceptive, giving a false appearance or impression, or corrupting, and that are contrary to EU's sovereignty, values, and interests. I will give three fictive examples to illustrate this definition and what we understand under foreign interference. First one relates to a research leader, which is collaborating with a foreign actor and is pressured into restricting or canceling lectures, workshops, conferences, or projects on a specific topic, most probably a topic that is of strategic interest of foreign actor. This can be a form of self-censorship. Second example relates more to the cybersecurity sphere. Imagine a foreign state-sponsored hacker group runs a phishing campaign on students and staff of a higher education institution to get access to their publications, data, and code. And finally, a technology officer is recruited by a foreign actor and is coerced or blackmailed into gaining access to confidential research and IPR. These examples show a couple of possible tactics that can be used by foreign actors, but there are even more, and I have listed a couple of them on the screen. For example, foreign actor can use political pressure by influential representatives, financial support in form of investment, donations, funding, loans, etc. Foreign actor can exploit people in strategic positions. Digital intrusions are also quite common, unfortunately, and spreading disinformation. But besides these possible tactics, what is even more worrisome is that these different tactics are often used together in an orchestrated manner. That's why when we talk about foreign interference threats, we also often refer to them as multidimensional threats that combine coercive and subversive measures that use both conventional and unconventional tools and tactics that are designed to be difficult to detect or attribute. And most of these tactics aim at targeting critical vulnerabilities and extend across all research activities, scientific domains, research outputs, and individuals at the organization. Now, I hope to have grasped your attention on why this is a serious threat. Let's move to the next question. Why higher education institutions? And in order to answer that question, let's first actually look at what are the possible objectives of foreign actor, and what does a higher education institution have to offer to them? Well, the objectives of a foreign actor, apologies for that. There's a Skype call. All right. Okay. So the objectives of a foreign interference actor serve to further the political, social, cultural, economic, and technological interests of the foreign actor, and this can be manifested in different forms. For example, it can be to retrieve information of interest to the foreign actor. It can be about influencing decisions in favor of the foreign actor, or it can be to undermine values contrary to the foreign actor. And so why higher education institutions? Well, first of all, higher education institutions have a strong record of internationalization. They have facilitated the development of international curricula and joint degrees, fostered international research, innovation projects, and supported the exchange of students, staff, and knowledge. So these institutions are often the very best in their respective field, also thanks to the benefits of international engagement and to their global openness. So now we have established what foreign interference is and why higher education institutions are a possible threat. Let's move to the final point regarding how to protect against foreign interference. First of all, my advice would be to make use of the support already provided by the local, regional, or national authorities, associations, etc. But there's also several initiatives on the EU level. You might be familiar with the foreign direct investment screening, legislative proposal on foreign subsidies, the anti-coercive measures instrument. But there's actually one more initiative that has already been mentioned in the introduction and that I actually want to focus on, an initiative that really puts higher education institutions in the center. I'm talking about the guidelines on tackling RNI for interference that will be available soon, and with soon I'm referring to early next year. So what is actually the aim of these guidelines? Well, there's a twofold aim. It wants to support higher education institutions to protect their fundamental values by safeguarding academic freedom, integrity, and institutional autonomy, but also to support higher education institutions to protect their key research findings and intellectual assets. And when we started working on these guidelines, and when we were analyzing all these different incidents of foreign interference, we saw that we need to try to group them. And what we have actually done is we have identified 4 areas of attention, which also form the structure of the guidelines that I hope you will be reading soon. These 4 areas of attention are values, governance, partnerships, and cybersecurity. Even more, within each of these areas of attention, we really want to have a comprehensive approach based on the four phases. So it's not just, we don't only see these guidelines as a tool to raise awareness about the risk and consequences of foreign interference, but we also want to support higher education institutions with potential measures they can implement in order to prevent foreign interference from happening as much as possible. But of course, you also have to acknowledge that these type of threats, these very complex threats, are also evolving over time. And even if preventive measures are in place, this will definitely limit the scale and the quantity of the foreign interference threats. Higher education institutions should also be prepared to know how to respond when foreign interference is observed and how to get back to their normal state of operations. I'll also share a couple of characteristics of these guidelines because they really illustrated how do we look at this issue. And I believe they will also frame the ongoing work that we're doing now and also that will be made public in the future. So first of all, these guidelines are state agnostic. As I mentioned a couple of slides before, it is highly difficult, especially for individual organization, through forensics, to actually determine the origin of a foreign interference attack. Focusing on a couple of countries would therefore create blind spots. Secondly, the guidelines are entirely on a voluntary basis. We actually encourage each higher education institutions to look around, to compile different documents, and to see what works the best for them. Thirdly, the guidelines are based on a positive agenda of partnerships coupled with constructive management of differences. And when we were working on these guidelines, we realized that the guidelines, in order to be useful for higher education institutions, they have to be as concrete as possible. High-level guidelines would require a lot of effort to translate these high-level guidelines into something that is practically useful for higher education institutions. But while we were also trying to make these guidelines as concrete as possible, we have also put a lot of effort in order to have recommendations that do not put a lot of additional burden on organizations. So a lot of the recommendations, either I would say the threshold for implementing them is quite low, or these recommendations can already be implemented in the existing structures. Now, before actually I close my presentation, and it's unfortunate that the guidelines are not published already today, then we could go more into the detail. But I just want to close with a couple of possible actions that the higher education institutions could consider. Of course, just to give an overview of everything that is possible, I would need much more than even the time that is allocated to entire webinar. But just a couple of possible actions in order to trigger the discussion. Well, first of all, it's crucial to cooperate with partners even if they are impressive settings. But it's important to be in control when you cooperate with these type of partners to make sure that your values are respected and what you're getting out of this deal is really compliant with your objectives. Second thing, and perhaps it should be often the first step for many higher education institutions, is introspection. Introspection is really the first step for developing a tailored response. So accordingly, higher education institutions can improve their understanding of the external pressures on the institution by conducting a vulnerability assessment. It's also important to raise broad awareness of potential risks involved in engaging in partnerships and of the ways their institutions seek to mitigate them. This can be achieved through training on foreign interference and dissemination of information at all levels, including research group levels. The information can also be published at institutions' website or in the newsletters, and could also be brought to academics and researchers' attention through roundtables, workshops, and training sessions. But what the information that higher education institutions provide to their staff and research, etc., should include, for example, what are the potential risks involved in partnerships, how and where can they find information or get support at institutional level, and when to and to whom do they need to report plans for a partnership, and also what type of due diligence procedures they should follow. Another possible actions refers to ensuring that knowledge, security, and academic integrity is safeguarded in all partnerships. And for that, higher education institutions could review their procedures and expand and strengthen them where needed. This could be overseen by, for example, institutions' foreign interference committee as part of the governance of the partnerships. Defining the minimum levels of due diligence for different types of partnerships, including donations by partners, and determine who is responsible for performing or outsourcing due diligence. The criteria for the level of due diligence may include the scope of the project, specific fields of research, specific partners in specific countries. And just one more that is not even listed here under the possible actions. Organizations can also define red lines for contribution. They can identify when the institution's knowledge security, academic freedom, and reputation would be at risk, and when a partnership or a collaboration of any kind is crossing a red line. Organizations can also identify acceptable or unacceptable risk for collaboration. On the right side of this final slide, you also see a potential procedure to establish robust partnership agreements. Of course, this is just an example, and it is really the idea that each higher education institution cherry picks the recommendations from the guidelines, and also, for example, as what you see here, to really fine-tune this to something that is useful for each organization. But for example, a first step should be developing a positive agenda, identifying safe or low-risk areas for international cooperation, preparing for partnerships, meaning ensuring it is based on a strategic vision as part of internationalization, develop a sound knowledge of the partner organizations, of its place in the national research system of its country, perform due diligence, meaning gather information enabling staff to assess potential risks with regard to security, values, reputation, etc., carefully negotiate partnership agreements, meaning ensure transparent distribution of responsibilities, including financial commitments, intellectual property rights, data management, and open science. 6, monitor the implementation of the agreement, meaning focus on the issues related to potential for interference. And finally, assess the outcomes of the collaboration and draw lessons of future engagements. Like stated when I came to this slide, is that the guidelines will contain so many different recommendations. And we really hope that once they are published, that you will have a thorough reading through them, and that you will get inspiration for this in order to one hand adjust your own actions, but also to, if needed, implement some of these recommendations in your organization. Thank you very much, and back to you, Thomas.
Thanks a lot, Slaven. I think that was really useful. What I like about the Commission approach is it's very analytical. It really takes a very step-by-step approach. And do I promise too much on your behalf if I say we'll see these in January? Is that?
Well, I think everybody who was involved in the process have seen the deadline shifting. I would say we do have kind of the ready document on the table, but there's still some procedural aspects that need to be completed. But as it stands right now, we would like to publish it indeed in January, together with the communication on the European strategy for universities.
Yeah, and then you mentioned another important document to look forward to in January, when the Commission will come with its university strategy, which you have not had for many, many years. So before I go on, I just want to first of all say thanks to all the people that have questions, loads of them. You can make our lives easier if we have to choose or don't have hope we do, but there's really a lot, to vote for the questions. If you go on the Q&A tab, and then you can see which questions you like, and you can vote them. So then we can understand also what's interesting for you. But before we go on to Albin, I just want to have a little bit of a look at how the situation is among the audience. Are these kind of guidelines something you're aware of and know and use? So we'll have a poll, which we can start now. If there are established guidelines for universities regarding risk management, yes, no, or don't know. So please go ahead. Let's see how this develops. I think we can say that although there's a fair majority that either don't have them or don't know if they have them, this is not something that's completely unknown across Europe. A third of our audience already have these things. So I think that's very interesting. That might actually be a very good place to start the conversation, because we have some practices, but we also have a lot of places where this is not happening. And I think that's a perfect cue to Albin, who will talk about a place where this has happened in Sweden, how the discussions were there, and what the experience and practices are. Albin, please, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And so see if the slides come up here. Thank you. So thank you very much for the invitation and for this introduction. And thank you also, Slaven, for this very interesting presentation of the upcoming guidelines. I'm very glad to be here to present a report that was written 2 years ago. It's called Responsible Internationalization: Guidelines for Reflection on International Academic Collaboration. And this report was as a result of a collaboration between Lund University, the KTH, Karolinska Institutet, and STINT. And STINT is a funding organization for collaboration in higher education and research internationally. The aim of this report is really to strengthen the resilience and risk management abilities on all levels at universities. And an important starting point is also that this report does not prescribe or recommend how individual universities should arrange risk management procedures. So that is very clear starting point. The background is, of course, very much the same as what we've heard Slaven talk about earlier. It's the context of international collaboration, which is becoming much more complex, where boundaries between academic collaboration on the one side and politics, security, human rights, economics on the other side are becoming blurred, and geopolitical tensions that are spilling over to higher education and research. And in this environment, it's becoming much more difficult to build and sustain strategic relationships. And this means that universities need to take steps to regain confidence and trust between each other. So that's one part of the background, and another part is that there was and there still is a public discussion in Sweden about universities' cooperation with partners in certain countries. There's even been calls to end collaboration or to impose restrictions. So there's actually really a need to build trust domestically and to demonstrate universities' ability to make well-grounded risk assessments and to act on these. Of course, for universities, this has been challenging because risk assessments that involve political aspects or human rights have not. They were new to many university managements, but it's also challenging, of course, because the biggest challenge is just to keep up and develop new collaborations and partnerships, also in these difficult contexts, with the building pressure about risk and foreign interference. Because again, the international collaboration is so fundamentally important to universities. So, what was needed? As I said, the theme was rather new in the Swedish context 2 years ago, and very few Swedish universities did have a structured process to analyze risk in international collaboration of this sort. And looking around, when starting this project, we saw that in other countries there were different kinds of documents to support risk management in international collaboration, but many of these guidelines or codes of conduct or even checklists were quite prescriptive in their nature and detailed. And some universities had even gone to quite bureaucratic risk management frameworks. And for us, it was important not to propose hard checklists or guidelines of that kind, for several reasons. One reason was that, well, risk management frameworks is really an issue for the individual university, based on their needs and context. But another reason is that each risk tends to be different from the one before. Each case tends to be different from the one before. So we wanted to provide a flexible tool, and a tool that could be used to develop universities' own capability to reflect on risks. And that the way to do that would be to encourage and support discussion at universities about these matters. And the aim was to develop a capacity and competence to analyze risks in international cooperation from different perspectives. And it's also, of course, apparent that risk management and risk awareness is not only an issue for university management. Because in order to reduce risk for universities in this sense, other levels of the university are also important, such as PIs or individual researchers or heads of departments. So they need to also be aware of the risks in their own projects and be able to make responsible judgments. And so they are also an important target group for this document. And finally, we wanted to build on the bottom-up logic of research collaboration. A top-down oriented instrument we thought would not be well received and could just be perceived as another bureaucratic burden on research. So the report really consists of a number of questions that should be asked before and during a collaboration. And it tries to systematize these questions and put them into context. And there's no ambition to be exhaustive at all, but rather to get a discussion going and reflection going at the universities. And I've added some examples of the questions here, just to illustrate what kinds of questions we're talking about. So the first area that we dealt with was, of course, the most important question to pose: why and how does the collaboration take place? Because if, for example, the aims of the collaboration is clear and it is balanced in terms of resources, then the collaboration is likely also to be resilient and sustainable in the long term. Another area is which actors are collaborating. Collaboration with another university is probably different in risk matters than if the partner is a government agency with close ties to politics in another country. The next area was political and social and cultural context. And obviously researchers need some knowledge of the country of the partner to be able to understand the setting of the project. An understanding of the legal context, both at home and in the partner and in the partner country, is also important because some projects can be subject to regulations, and export controls, intellectual property rights are good examples of this. Institutional autonomy, of course, varies widely and may have important impact on academic freedom. And finally, ethical aspects are important to keep in mind. Questions relating to ethical dumping, human rights, academic freedom, again, are relevant here. So I would say that when I was talking about the effects of this report, now it's been 2 years since it was published, and it's fair to say, I think, that the report has become a point of reference when discussing these matters on the national level in Sweden. Inspired by this report, some universities are also developing their guidelines on risk management. We're also seeing some collaboration between universities about strategic risk analysis to sort of share resources between each other about these things. But I think the most important thing that we are developing now is seminars and workshops based on this report, and also where we discuss real and fictive cases. Again, to start sort of becoming used to making these judgments. Their way of engaging in a structured discussion about the opportunities and risks in international partnerships. And in the coming year, I think that we will roll out these workshops in a wider way. But we are also seeing initiatives to build a stronger supporting framework nationally for making strategic assessments about individual countries or regions. So just to finish off, all in all, I think this report has been a very good starting point for discussing risks in Sweden. But we now really need to step up even further to become a little bit more concrete. But when building a risk management framework, we really must be mindful that they have to be enabling and strive to build trust between partners and actors, rather than be restrictive and alarmist. Because I think there's a real danger that researchers and teachers become so worried about risks that they give up on international projects, or that the perception of risks risks that are unfounded leads to prejudice or intolerance on campuses. So this is it's really important not to how do you say, throw out the baby with the bathwater here, and to be mindful about the real importance is to be able to sustain international collaboration even with partners in difficult contexts. So and with that, I thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Albin. I think that was extremely interesting to see something that's much more bottom up and much more. Let's build a framework and then we put content into it, and which is another way you can go. And I think it's dependent on your system whether you want to go one way or the other. I also think from our side, applaud the thing about risk management systems. It's a way of de-dramatizing things. Once you know what to do and you know what you should know, you are actually able to go and deal with partners that are difficult, and partners can be difficult these days. So I think that's worth to keep in mind. And I think it was very good that you brought these big discussions that we hear, for instance, from our American colleagues about that you get this sort of blanket mistrust. Oh, this person has certain origins, so maybe he or she cannot be trusted, and be clear about what are the risks and what are not the risks. But that being said, thank you very much, everybody, also for all the questions you have, and I'll see if we can get through all of them. But there's one big question that everybody loves. What about education? Does this go for research, or what about education? I'll ask it to both of you. Slaven, you probably have a more political answer to this, but is this really research specific, or does it also go for the education part?
Yes, I'm happy to take that question, actually, and it's a good question, because when you probably saw the picture of how guidelines will be titled, it will be titled Tackling RNI Foreign Interference. But I can reassure you that, first of all, how we have developed these guidelines, if you just look at the Commission side, well, these guidelines have been developed in close collaboration with DG EAC and GRC and EAS, but DG EAC was really in lead together with DG RTD. Secondly, we have also while developing the guidelines, we have also consulted on one hand with the member states, but with a lot of university associations, and we have also gathered their input. So I would not say that the guidelines are only focusing on RNI. When you read them, you will see that the education side is very well present. This was a political decision to put this title on the guidelines that do refer to RNI, but of course, when we talk about RNI, also this cannot be seen in entire isolation. So it was really putting higher education institutions at the center, together with research organizations, and look at what are the issues and needs.
Okay, thanks a lot, and I suppose the awareness goes for education as well as for research. Albin, the report is called Academic Cooperation. Does it include the education part as well?
Of course it does. Of course it does. But some of the issues concerning education are different than when we are talking about research, obviously. But this report definitely does deal with education issues as well.
By the way, I actually have it on the net. Can I put it in the handout and people can download it?
The report, of course, of course.
I will just share a link, and there you go. I'll just call it guidelines here for the sake of There you go. And if you go on the right to handout, you'll find the guidelines from Sweden. Then I'll the two very popular questions here about academic freedom. This wasn't really mentioned so directly as I at least would have been expecting. One about protection of academic freedom, particularly in social science humanities. And somebody also asked about using the academic freedom index to say, is this partner maybe high or low on the index? How does that protection of academic freedom, I suppose both your own and the academic freedom and security of your partners, fit? And what I wonder about as well, if we use sort of indexing, won't it be against having a state agnostic approach? So maybe you start with Albin this time about academic freedom, protecting academic freedom for yourself and your partners.
Well, I think this is a difficult area, of course, because academic freedom is one of those concepts that are we don't have a common definition of academic freedom. So in every setting and every country, I think there would be a different interpretations. And so I think what would be important is to have a discussion with the partner about these fundamental values that we want to sustain in the partnership, and to be transparent about what definition do we want to have of these values together, and to understand each other in that way. So that would be, because drawing red lines in the sand is very difficult.
And so would you say, since we actually can't agree among ourselves exactly what this is, at least have some kind of discussion, so you can have a consensus within the partnership. Slaven, academic freedom, it's important for the Commission. Yes.
So actually, you probably noticed that when I started my presentation, I was focusing on definition of foreign interference, and now you mentioned the definition of academic freedom, which indeed there is no universal definition of academic freedom. But for the short term, what we have been using really as a reference is the Rome Communique of November last year, that basically defines academic freedom as freedom of academic staff and students to engage in research, teaching, learning, and communication in and with society, without interference nor fear of reprisal. So this is a definition we really use a lot. Then when it comes to academic freedom, well, this fits in the general discussion regarding how do we protect fundamental values. And this includes academic freedom, integrity, institutional autonomy, and this has always been one of the goals of the European higher education area. Sufficient emphasis, I believe, has been put on academic freedom and integrity, institutional autonomy, etc., etc. These fundamental values will also be a key priority in the upcoming European strategy for universities I also introduced before. And more recently, if you look at the EUA policy agenda, which has been adopted by the Council on the 26th of November, more specifically, the Action 6 relates to academic freedom, which includes, among other things, also support to higher education institutions and research performing organizations to develop action plans on the basis of the guidelines. And just perhaps to close regarding the academic freedom index, I believe it's very good that you brought this up. And you also see in the guidelines, it's also something that we use as a tool. There are not so many useful tools. So I would say there are some tools like this one, that we use in the guidelines. Of course, there are some shortages, but I do think that the global AFI, or Academic Freedom Index, it definitely provides a good point of orientation. But then after that, it is important to conduct a more detailed assessment of the research, educational, and institutional environment in the country of the specific partner institutions. And finally, also, you should also analyze the external actors' motives that might undermine academic freedom, and also monitor the external actors' capacities for restricting or actually to be able to restrict how you conduct, how you protect academic freedom.
Good. That's a very good and deep answer, and it is indeed a big discussion about how we measure and the use of these indexes. I tried to gather questions a little bit because there's so many good ones. There are two about something that you said, Albin, about looking at case studies. And one is about using anonymized real case studies, and one is about reporting the case studies. But if I just divide it in the way that, Albin, if you can tell about how you use theoretical real life case studies in the work you do in Sweden, as you mentioned in the presentation.
Well, as far as we can, and as far as they're not too sensitive, the cases, we can use real life cases, of course, going back to different situations that we've seen before, but also we're trying to construct cases that are useful and that really pinpoints a specific problem. And these have to do with academic freedom. What would you do when you have obviously different definitions of academic freedom between yourself and the partner? Or what do you do if you see that foreign interference is absolutely an issue with one of the partners? These kinds of questions may be very sensitive. So we're trying to construct cases around those. I think also what we need to do is actually to start to collect cases, and because there's quite a lot of talk about there being risks out there, but the concrete examples of these risks tend to stay at the individual universities, and it would be interesting to have a framework where you can probably report in an anonymized manner.
What do you say, Slaven? Is that an idea?
I'm sorry, did you...
What do you say? Is that an idea to have a system of reporting? That's also in the questions.
Well, it is also one of the ideas we are I would say playing it currently, because now of course we see the guidelines the first step, and in the guidelines we try to give quite some illustrative examples, but of course it is something on an ongoing basis, and there are a couple of concerns with that. Well, definitely agree that this would be a good thing to do, but we had to also acknowledge the fact that successful attempts of foreign interference usually remain unnoticed. It are those failed attempts of foreign interference that often reach the attention either of media or the board, etc., etc. So first thing I want to say, there's a lot of that simply happens without institutions being aware of. Second thing is it requires to have an environment where, for example, universities are willing to freely share and freely expose what has happened to them. On one hand, there might be certain resistance to this because this might be seen as reputational damage. You don't want to come on news because there was a data leak or something has been stolen one way or another. But second point regarding this is that actually by exposing what has happened to you, you might on one hand help like-minded or other institutions in a similar situation, but you're actually exposing a gap, often a gap in security, which has been used by a foreign state actor. But if for the moment it's public, it can be almost used by many more different actors. It doesn't have to be even be state-sponsored. So I think this is a very important discussion. We have to see how we can kind of encourage institutions to share this type of sensitive information, either in a proximity of them with the national intelligence services, or in a more platform where things are shared anonymously. But we really have to keep account with all unwanted side effects this might bring before we actually develop something like that.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily want to do your dirty laundry in public. But on the other hand, that's also how we can learn how to avoid it. So there's a discussion to be had. Now we're almost out of time, but I have really two questions that I'd like to ask. So the first is, just to put it simply, can we get the researchers and academics to play along? Is it something they will buy into, or will they do as they did before? Will they be able to see things with fresh eyes? Maybe Albin, you coming from a university. I'll start with you, but then I'll come to you, Slaven.
I think there's a sense of worry among many researchers and teachers about these things, because we have these discussions, and discussions about risks are obviously there, and I mean, we see that political situation globally is different now than before. So I think there's a sense of need to and guidance among researchers. But also, I think it's very important that they are given the tools to stay in control themselves of these things, and not have this as a layer of bureaucracy that is coming on top of everything else.
So the bottom. Yeah, Slaven, you wanted to say.
I just want to add. So basically, when we start working on this issue, then we saw, for example, that industry was quite advanced when it comes to this. And when we were speaking with different universities, university associations, we could see some universities were concerned about this, were in the process of developing something themselves, but there are also universities that simply didn't see it as a threat. What we have seen over the last, I would say, 18 months was a pretty significant shift in the mindset, definitely on the organizational level. The fact that we're having this webinar today also reflects that there's a need and there's an interest to tackle these type of topics. So I also don't think that this will be in the current and probably the short-term future geopolitical context. This is going to remain a hot topic. We do have to emphasize this is a shared responsibility. It's not only about what researchers, academics can do. So on different levels, there are different measures that have to be taken. Currently, we are focusing on the level of organizations, because we see there is the most that can be done, and they're also quite close to the researchers. But in the future, we also want to make the life easier, on one hand, of the organizations, because it's not always easy to get on board your researchers and other staff, but also of the researchers and other staff as well. So, for example, in parallel with this discussion we're having right now, there's a discussion in the G7 on developing a virtual academy and a toolkit for researchers. Which should be very as simple as possible, as useful as possible as well. But I want to say, in the next step, we want to focus on what can we do about researchers, how to make their life easier. And so this is most probably there will always be a little bit. You cannot avoid bureaucratic part entirely, but at least to limit this as much as possible.
Right. We are risking going over time, but I do want to have the last question here because I think it's an important one. And if I understand it correctly, if you look at these guidelines and countering foreign interference with let's say authoritarian classes on, you could say this is a way to regulating researchers and actually curb their academic freedom. And I can see that the foreign interference argument is a typical authoritarian argument. So this can't be done because you help foreign powers. How do we make sure that the rules that come from Europe and the practices that we have actually are models of protecting academic freedom and not curbing it? Slaven, I think that's for you.
Very good and very, very delicate question, as you have probably said. So everything that we are doing right now is, of course, on a voluntary basis. We are trying to convince each individual researcher why this is important to them. And at the end, I believe what we're actually trying to do is really to create this protective environment in which they can do what they are good at and what they want to do. Because there are going to be temptations along the way. And so it's really a matter of what, from our side, we do put, for example, all these fundamental values, including academic freedom, at the center. It is on the voluntary basis, but it's really with the aim to protect them. And from the moment we see some measures are, for example, some recommendations might go in too far, and of course, this will be corrected.
That's a very good answer. Albin, do you want to say something on this?
No, but
No.
It's a good question.
It is a very good question. This is why I risk to go over time. But I'm very sorry for those that asked other very good questions. We can't make it through all of them. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for the speakers. I think we all learned a lot from today, and I think there's a lot to learn in the future. The Swedish report is in the handouts. There are other reports out there if you want to look for them. The Dutch, the British have done this. And we're very much looking forward to see the European guidelines. So with that being said, thank you to all of you. It was great to have this series of webinars about this topic during the autumn. We are planning to have a season 2. So stay put on the EUA newsletter or wherever you get your EUA news. And we might come up with a new series for you about topics that touch the new world we're living in. But on that note, I'd like to say goodbye and thank you to all of you.